G'day everyone, welcome back to the vlog. It is 3:30 PM on a Friday, so you know what that means. It's time to go to the casino. We're going to head into Crown right now, put our name on the 2-5 and the 5-10 list. We'll see which game gets up, but it's me. I'm going to be happy playing either one of the games. Just as long as I'm playing a bit of poker, I'm going to be happy. So let's head to the casino. It's about 4:40 in the afternoon. It was a long drive with a bunch of traffic to get into the casino tonight, which is pretty typical of Melbourne on a Friday afternoon. So I wouldn't recommend doing that, but I am at the casino now and I'm ready to go play some poker. So let's chuck my name on the list and see which games we can play.
Call. Raise 20. 18.
It's about 4 AM here, Saturday morning, wrapping up the session. It was a pretty long one. We played a lot of interesting hands that we'll get to. I ran pretty well. Unfortunately, I did make at least 2 key mistakes that I was pretty disappointed with. So we'll go over those, but I did make some good plays I'm much more satisfied with as well. So I just got to head home first. Hopefully the Friday afternoon traffic has died down by 4 AM. So we'll head home and we'll get into these hands. G'day everyone. It is currently 12:30 PM on the Saturday, so I went home, had a bit of a sleep, sort of took the opportunity to mull over some of these hands a bit before we get into the analysis. In addition to, I was just dead tired after the session. We played a long one last night and we did a bit of stake jumping as well. Started off on the 2-5, which is where we played this hand. I look down under the gun, I have Ace-King offsuit. This is obviously a hand that I'm going to want to raise from any position. I make it 15, I get calls from the cutoff, the small blind and the big blind. So we're 4 ways to a flop, and it's a pretty nice flop. It is Ace-King 2 with 2 diamonds. So first hand, we end up flopping top 2 pair. It's not a bad start to the session by any means. So when the action checks to me, I think I'm going to want to bet this board a bunch of the time, particularly with Ace-King. I can get value from worse aces, which potentially all of the people in the field could have. Obviously there's flush draws too, 9, 10 of hearts, etc. And there's actually a few straight draws as well, like Queen 10, Jack 10, 4-5, 3-4, etc. So there's just a bunch of value to get by betting here. So that's what I decide to do. I make it 35. Then the cutoff folds, the small blind folds, and the big blind decides to call. When he does call, like I said, he could have any worse ace. Calling in the big blind, he could even potentially have hands like Ace-3 offsuit, Ace-6 offsuit, and then some strong hands like Ace-Queen potentially, Ace-Jack. So we are heads up to the turn, and the turn is the 3 of hearts. This card feels pretty inconsequential. 4-5 got there, which was a straight draw. But other than that, this doesn't really change anything. Ace-3 is now a worse 2 pair than my 2 pair. I guess is another potential hand in villain's range that this card could change. But when the big blind checks to me, I think this is another spot where it's just a very obvious value bet. I can still try and get value out of those worse ace hands. Flush draws too, might be put in a tough spot if I bet again. So that's another hand I could potentially get value from. Maybe it would fold out on the turn. However, I do decide to use a large sizing as well, just because this card doesn't really change many of the dynamics on this board in particular, and I can still get called by Ace-Jack, Ace-10, Ace-9, etc., because those hands haven't really changed in value at all. And I think if he called with those on the flop, he's definitely going to be tempted to call again, particularly on this turn. So I actually decide to bet 115 into the $117 pot. And then the big blind, he starts tanking a bit, thinking about it, before he eventually calls. So we're happy to get another straight value. I think he could still potentially have an top pair with the ace, or a flush draw is somewhat less likely. However, if he does have a hand like Jack 10 of diamonds, Queen 10 of diamonds, etc., like those, even 5-6 of diamonds actually a combo draw as well. So there's a bunch of stronger flush draws that also have straight draws that I definitely don't think he's going to fold here. It is worth noting the gut shot 4-5 did get in on the turn. I'm not sure whether the opponent would like just call with that hand, but it's definitely possible they do have some slow plays in their range, such as the 4-5 or potentially pocket twos is also another likely hand with lose to. But I think those hands will raise off my large bet at least some of the time, so I'm not really too scared of him having one of those stronger hands, and I'm really feeling comfortable moving into the river, particularly when the river card is the Ace of Hearts. So first hand in, and we river the nut 4 house. It's a pretty good start to the session. So the big blind decides to check, and I actually have a pretty interesting decision here. I could either bet smaller, something like 150, to try and get called by hands that are weaker than trips. So if my opponent was calling down with like King Queen of diamonds, which was like a pair and a flush draw as well, King Jack of diamonds, King 10 of diamonds, those hands might be tempted to call a smaller bet, just because when the top pair pairs on the river, in his mind, it's less likely that I have an ace now because one of the aces is on the board, so his king sort of moves up in value. So he might be tempted to call with some of those weaker hands, but the other option is I could go all in for 430, which is actually an overbet to the size of the pot. Why I would potentially like doing this is just to try and stack this guy when he does have one of those stronger aces, when he did slow play a hand like 4-5 or pocket twos, although like I said earlier, that's a bit unlikely on this river, but it's more so just trying to get max value from like an ace jack, an ace 10, an ace 9 type hand. And then there's also some potential that like a king queen of diamonds type hand might be tempted to call the all in. It's a bit ambitious though that hand would call. I wouldn't call if I had that hand and the guy went all in, but you never know. Some people like to make the hero call. Really, that's not the point of going all in though, is to try and stack an ace or a stronger hand. And that's actually what I decided to do. I want max value with the nuts here on the river, so I move all in for 430, and the opponent, he just like, he like groans, and he takes about 10 seconds before throwing in the call. So we have the nuts, obviously we go, we show the ace king, and then he looks disgusted, and he shows 4-5 of diamonds. So not only did he turn the nuts, but he had a redraw to a flush, and we actually sucked out on the river with the full house. So it's good to kick off the VOD with a bit of run good here, making the nuts on the river, sucking out on the straight. So I'm definitely not complaining. Alright, so after about an hour of playing 2-5, sort of just raising when I had a strong hand and getting called by a bunch of people and having to check fold when I completely miss flops, my name gets called for the 5-10-20. So very happy to move on to the high stakes game, particularly on Friday night. And that's where we play this first hand. About half an hour into the session, this guy had been like opening a lot of hands, playing a bit loose, showing some speculative cards at showdown. So he raises to 50 in the low jack. Then the action folds to me in the small blind. I have ace 5 of hearts, and I actually decide to 3-bet this hand. This isn't necessarily a standard play versus a low jack open. However, against an opponent who have been raising a lot of hands that I don't think he's going to want to put much more money in when I 3-bet, I think this is a great spot to mix in a bit of the light 3-bet with ace 5. I think this is a good spot for it. However, if you did decide to fold, that would also be a good play in my opinion. Calling isn't the worst either actually with ace 5, because ace 5 is pretty strong. You can make straights, nut flushes, If you make trip fives, it's a pretty good spot with the ace kicker. So ace five suited is a strong hand. So if you did just want to call, I wouldn't think that's the worst play in the world. It's not something I would do myself. I think raising or folding is definitely a better play out of the small blind with ace five suited. That's my opinion. I do decide to 3-bet, and then the original raiser, he thinks about it for a minute, not literally a minute, just a little bit, and then decides to throw in the call. So we are heads up to the flop. The flop is the ace of diamonds, 10 of clubs, 6 of clubs. Now the actions on me, I actually decide to check here. I think this is one of the mistakes that I made during the session. I think there's a lot of value to bet here, get called by potentially under pairs, particularly if I bet small, obviously flush draws as well. So I did decide to check to sort of have some stronger hands in my checking range, but I think maybe this is a good spot to bet. So that's the first mistake I made in this hand. So I check, and then the low jack player decides to bet 250. I think once we check our top pair here, we have a very easy decision to call this bet. The opponent could be betting worse hands for potentially value / protection, like if he does have a pocket eights or a pocket nine, something like that. He might just be betting to try and get me off a king-queen type hand. So I think I definitely have to call since he does have weaker hands in his range. But obviously it's also important to be cautious that he could have a stronger ace, ace jack, ace nine suited potentially, stuff like that. He could definitely just call the 3-bet with and then be betting this flop with. And then he does have strong hands as well. Pocket sixes is probably a hand he will play like this. Ace 10, maybe even ace 10 offsuit is a hand he might play like this. So just important to keep that in mind as we go heads up. So the turn is the jack of diamonds. I think I have another very easy decision to check here. Once I check the flop, leading out this turn would be bizarre and I don't think it accomplishes much. So we check here, and then the low jack player decides to check as well. So we are still heads up to the river, which is the jack of clubs. So this is pretty much the worst card in the deck for my ace 5 suited here. Not only do I lose to a flush draw that my opponent potentially checked back on the turn, but if my opponent did check a jack back on the turn, like if they bluff the flop with jack 10 or king jack, queen jack type hands, jack 9 suited even is possible. They might be checking back the turn because they turned some showdown value, and now they have trips. So there's a lot I lose to, flushes, trips, and stronger aces. So when I check and the low jack decides to bet 550, I think this is a really prudent spot for me to fold, just because I think my opponent does have a lot of stronger hands, like potentially a flush, potentially a jack. Or if my opponent does have an ace, the chances that I'm out kicked with my 5 are very high. Obviously I lose to ace queen, ace jack, and ace 10, which was a flop 2 pair. I think he would bet ace 10 on the turn, potentially being that strong, but I do lose to ace jack, ace queen. If my opponent does have something like ace 9 through ace 6, we do actually chop on this river because the board paired and the 10 would play. But I don't necessarily know if he's betting a chop for value, because is he really expecting to get called by pocket kings? Maybe that will be the one reason why I would consider calling here. But I think the more prudent decision would be to fold the ace 5 suited here. So of course I make the mistake and I do throw in the call, sort of hoping that he's bluffing with like a pocket 8s or a pocket 9s type hand, but in retrospect I think that's a pretty ambitious I think it's ambitious of me to assume my opponent would take this line with those hands. And then also I was somewhat thinking like maybe we're chopping with another ace, so I throw in the call, which I think is a mistake, and then my opponent does show the ace 8 of clubs, so he rivered the nut flush. So make 2 key mistakes in that hand, and we end up losing a big one as a result. But that's poker sometimes. I just have to learn from that mistake And next time I play a hand against this opponent on this type of board, or even when I just play this type of board again against any opponent, I just need to keep in mind that the ace-5 suited might be no good here. So we played one last big hand before I ended up wrapping up the session. Played a few hands in between, but like I said, it was more stuff like I raise pre-flop, everyone folds. I raise pre-flop, I get 3-bet, I fold. Nothing really of interest until I play this hand, where a tight aggressive player opens the low jack for 60. Then the big blind, who's a loose aggressive player, he calls the 60. Then the action's on me in the straddle. I have king of clubs, jack of diamonds, and I decide to call. I think this is a pretty quote-unquote standard play to call with the king-jack offsuit. I don't really want to be 3-betting with this hand, particularly against the tighter players. Middle position open, since they're going to have a bunch of strong hands, and not really looking to fold either with a hand as strong as king-queen. So I throw in the call, which is pretty much what I'm always going to do here with king-jack offsuit, and then we're 3 ways to a flop. And again, the flop's a pretty good one. The flop is king, jack, 9 with 2 spades. So again, we flop top 2 pair on a board with a flush draw, so can't complain about running bad this session, at least not yet. So the big blind checks, I check to the pre-flop aggressor, which is the standard play here, in my opinion. Then the pre-flop raiser decides to bet 75, the big blind folds quickly, and then the action's on me, and I decide to check raise here. Obviously I'm check raising for value with my top 2 pair. If my opponent does have a strong 1-pair hand, like pocket aces, ace king, king queen, I want to start to build the pot now before any scare cards like a flush card or an ace makes a straight, a 10 makes a straight, just hands like that just come in and scare my opponent off the pot. A 9 makes a straight also. It's just a bunch of scare cards. I want to try and get value now when my opponent does have the stronger hands like aces, like ace king, king queen, king 10, king, maybe king 9 suited. That's pretty loose open from, I don't think this guy's opening those hands, but I'm just raising for value. And then I make it 250, and then the low jack calls the 250. So we are heads up to a turn, and the turn, it's another good card again. It's the jack of clubs. So we turn a full house. It's always nice to make full houses in poker. And then I have the option to check or bet. I think this is a good spot to still continue to bet. Obviously, if my opponent does have a flush draw or a straight draw, they're probably going to be tempted to fold when I bet here. But I think that it's still good to bet, because if my opponent does have ace king or pocket aces, even a king queen, this is going to be a card that they're going to continue on, because the jack actually makes it less likely that I was check raising a hand like king jack or jack 9 for value on the flop. So they're going to be tempted to call with those hands, I think. And in addition to that, like, he could have a jack as well. It's unlikely, but it's somewhat possible he has a jack 10 or a queen jack or an ace jack that floated the flop. So it's also possible that we can get value from those hands all the time. And in addition to that, when I do want to bluff this turn with like a flush draw or a straight draw, I can still bet it and then still have some of these stronger hands like full house in my range. I decide to bet 350, and then the low jack thinks about it for a little bit and throws in the call. So obviously pretty happy with that. And then we're still heads up to the river, and the river is the queen of spades. So I think in this card I still have to value bet. If my opponent does have king queen, he now has top 2 pair, I can get value from that hand. Obviously it's going to be a pretty tough spot for pocket aces and ace king if I continue to bet here. But I could potentially get value from that hand. And in addition, if my opponent does have queen jack, obviously that's a sick cooler and they river to full house, so I can definitely get value from that hand. Jack 10 also somewhat possible, so I decide to bet 600. And then much to my surprise, the low jack actually decides to go all in over my 600. He makes it 1,740, and then the action's on me, and I'm actually bit concerned here that my opponent has a stronger hand. If you look at the way the hand played out, they could definitely have ace-10 of spades, which is a royal flush on this river. In addition, they could have 10-9 of spades rather, which is also a straight flush. So those are two hands that we lose to. In addition, it's also somewhat possible that my opponent played pocket kings like this and they have a stronger full house. Having said all that though, I don't think I can fold the king-jack full house on this river, just because it is somewhat possible my opponent slow played nines and now they're shoving that for value on this river, trying to get called by a flush. Also, queen-jack, like I said earlier, that's also a full house they might be moving in for. So, and then there's like the outside possibility that they did have a hand like pocket aces or ace-king and they're now turning their hand into a bluff. So considering that they might have all of those hands in their range, I can't fold the full house on this river. So I do throw in the call, and the opponent shows jack, king of diamonds. So we end up chopping the pot. Obviously I show my hand, and I wouldn't say that it's good, but it's good for a chop. So we don't get stacked there by some crazy straight flush or royal flush. But yeah, we do chop a pretty big pot in this spot. So that was pretty much the last big hand I played for the session. I think that I played like another hour after that, and then went home because the game was getting short-handed and I was dead tired, like so tired I couldn't even do these hand analyses. I'm gonna have to look that word up. I couldn't do these hand analyses last night, so had a bit of a sleep, woke up this morning. Now I've got them out to you. Please let me know what you think of all these hand analyses, what you think of the vlog overall, any room for improvement, things you did like, things you didn't like. Let me know in the comments. I'm going to head out now, but I'll be bringing out another vlog for you guys soon. Peace.